Okay, so behind me is the Arch of Titus. Okay, similar to the Arch of Constantine and many others, this was obviously erected in honour of the Emperor Titus. Okay, so the name speaks for itself. A couple of quick sort of facts, dimensions. It stands 15.4 metres high. It's 13.5 metres wide and 4.75 metres deep. Okay, the inner arch 8.3 metres high and 5.36 metres wide. All right. Despite the fact that it's called the Arch of Titus, it was actually erected by Emperor Domitian, who was Titus' brother. And the commemoration, again, in spite of the fact it's called the Arch of Titus, commemorates the victory of his father Vespasian and his brother Titus during the Jewish war, okay, in Judea, which took place around about the year 70 to 71 AD, during which Jerusalem was sacked and the temple was plundered. On the top, we've got an inscription there. I won't try and say it in Latin for you, but in English, it reads, "The Senate and the people of Rome, to the divine Titus, son of the divine Vespasian, Vespasian Augustus." That was his full name. So again, the inscription is reasserting the divinity of those two emperors. Okay, so again, we've got this concept of the divine connection. You can get out and have a look in just a few minutes, but on one of the panels we've got Titus riding a 4-horse chariot, a quadriga, okay, and shows him being crowned by a personification of victory. The goddess Roma stands in front, holding the bridle of one of the horses, and the two figures to the right of the chariot are personifications of the people of Rome with a naked torso, and the Senate, who's wearing a toga. Okay, so it's connecting the two. The panel that we're particularly interested in, though, on the other side, is set in 71 AD-ish, okay, and records Titus' triumphant procession into Rome with the participants in the picture carrying the booty from the Temple of Jerusalem after the sacking of the city. Okay, and you'll be able to see, it's just behind me over there, the menorah, 7-branch candlestick, silver trumpets, the showbread table, and the fire pans for carrying the ashes from the altar. Okay, so you'll be able to see those 4 elements. There are also some figures carrying placards which would probably have indicated the names of the conquered cities and peoples. So literally, as he's marching into the city, returning from his escapades with his armies, they're holding up placards telling all the people of Rome who he's conquered, where he's conquered, and literally displaying the spoils of his conquering. So this is the whole thing. And it's these spoils, remember, I assume the selling of which were used to pay for the construction of the Colosseum. Okay, from our point of view though, this stands as a physical witness to the fulfillment of prophecy. And this is really important for us, isn't it? It stands as a physical witness to the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Matthew 24, verse 2, this is Jesus or Yeshua speaking, says, "Don't you see all these?" And he's talking about the stones of the temple. He responds to them, "Amen, I tell you, not one stone will be left here on top of another. Every one will be torn down." Okay, and he's referring prophetically to the future sacking of the temple in Jerusalem. Rather than continue with Matthew 24, I'm going to flick to Luke 21 because it reads fractionally different and I think is worth pointing out here. Luke 21, verse 5, still talking about the same event with Jesus addressing his disciples. While some were talking about the temple, how it was decorated, remember we're in Jerusalem now, how it was decorated with beautiful stones and offerings, Yeshua said, "As for these things you are looking at, the days will come when not stone will be left upon one another, every one will be torn down." Okay, so that mirrors Matthew 24. If we skip on a little bit to verse 20, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those inside the city must get out, and those in the countryside must not enter her. For these are the days of punishment to fulfill all that was written." Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath on this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all the nations. I've already told you that 70 AD, when that was sacked, there were masses of Jewish slaves being brought back, prisoners of war. They will be led away captive into all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles, and I love this word, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So there will be a time when it will no longer be trampled by the Gentiles. And we're living in those days now, aren't we? So this literally, when Domitian created it in honor of his dad and his brother, and where we get the name Titus from, he thought he was making a great big statement about victory, about his conquering. But actually, he was making a great big memorial proving the prophetic fulfillment of Yeshua's words, which is why, one of the reasons why it's so significant for us. Let me just read a couple of other little bits for you. So in 67 AD, Emperor Vespasian, who's Titus and Domitian's dad, Emperor Vespasian dispatches 4 legions, which is approximately 5,000 fighting men per legion, plus auxiliaries, totaling around 40,000 soldiers in total, and he dispatches them into Judea and Samaria because there's a massive rebellion going on within the Jewish population. Okay? And the rebellion that is going on is basically against idolatrous tyrants in the region. We saw it, if you don't know the story of Hanukkah, you understand Antiochus as a Greek trying to impose certain idol worship on the people and how they revolted and eventually took back the temple. Similar situation here. What we've got is the Romans with all of their gods and the polytheism and everything else that's going on, and the Jews didn't like it. I mean, they didn't like being ruled by a foreign power anyway, but worse so was the fact of all this idolatry that was being imposed on them, and so they were rebelling against it. This is one of the things why the Romans really started to dislike the Jews. Okay, they were rebelling constantly. Of course, Roman soldiers then were dying in the midst of it, which had direct literal impact on families back at home, and this birthed a particular resentment towards the Jews over this particular issue. Of the 40,000 soldiers that Vespasian dispatches, one of these is called the 10th Legion, which is a very famous Roman legion. And it's headed by Titus, Vespasian's son, and the ensign is a boar. It's a boar's head that you see on the ensign of the legion. So as they were going into battle, you've got this pig's head, this boar's head basically, which of course, from a Jewish perspective, is an unclean beast. Not just a pig, but it's a beast. It's a pig with horns, isn't it? Coming towards them, which is interesting. 70 AD, Titus attacks Jerusalem just after Passover. Okay? It takes 2 months of intense fighting before eventually he breaches the walls. 2 months to breach the walls of Jerusalem. And do you know what's really interesting? Is that he probably wouldn't have breached the walls except for the fact that there was infighting amongst the Jewish factions. And the Zealots, believe it or not, destroyed the food supplies within Jerusalem in order to try and provoke other people to fight. They wanted to create a need for them to fight. If they hadn't, then Jerusalem arguably would have been sustained for a lot longer. Yeshua's words were always going to come to fulfillment, but how it happened. So like I said, 2 months of intense fighting and the walls are breached. And the Hebrew date for the date of the breach is the 17th of Tammuz. Okay? 5 months later, 5 months after breaching the walls, he eventually reached the Temple Mount. That's how hard the Jewish people resisted the mighty Roman Empire. And the Roman soldiers were highly trained, very skilled. In fact, the Roman army was so advanced of its time. It was the first army that had professional soldiers. So these guys weren't forced to do it. They weren't being told to do it because on pain of death or punishment or something like that. They were being paid, and as a result, they were highly motivated, spent a lot of time drilling, training, and all the rest of it because they wanted to do it. And there were huge rewards for soldiers. Okay, so they were very, very skilled operators. 5 months to reach the Temple Mount in spite of this, because the Jewish people had such zeal for what they were doing. And of course, when Titus got there, razed the temple to the ground. Okay? I've got a couple of quotes here from two Roman historians. Okay? One's a guy called Cassius, who you may or may not have heard of. The other guy, a guy called Josephus, who's probably a little bit more familiar to you. Both writing accounts of what took place in Jerusalem at that time. Okay? So this is Cassius, first of all. And he says this: "The populace was stationed below in the court, and the elders on the steps, and the priests in the sanctuary itself." So this is a positioning of the Jewish forces within the temple area. "And though they were but a handful fighting against a far superior force, they were not conquered until part of the temple was set on fire. Then they met their death willingly, some throwing themselves on the swords of the Romans, some slaying one another, others taking their own lives, and still others leaping into the flames. And it seemed to everybody, and especially to them, that so far from being destruction, it was victory and salvation and happiness to them, that they perished along with the temple." Such was the significance of the temple. Josephus writes this: While the holy house, i.e. the temple, was on fire, everything was plundered that came to hand, and 10,000 of those that were caught, so this is Jewish prisoners, were slain. Nor was there a commiseration of any age, but children and old men and priests were all slain in the same manner. Remember what Jesus or Yeshua's words were? Those in Judea at this time need to flee. Woe to those who are pregnant nursing mothers. The Romans were not partial, regardless of age or gender or role or anything like that. And remember what we said about the culture and the brutality of it. The flame was also carried a long way and made an echo, together with the groans of those who were slain. One would have thought the whole city would have been on fire, nor can one imagine anything greater and more terrible than this noise. So picture the scene of what's going on. And then literally everybody who was still fighting basically allowing themselves to be killed in that moment. And those who didn't were slaughtered anyway. Before the setting fire to the temple, the Romans removed anything of value. Then they harnessed a group of Jewish slaves to take these priceless artifacts back to Rome. We've already talked about this a little bit, haven't we? Their arrival in Rome is memorialized on the arch behind me. It was the tradition in Roman Jewish community that Jews would never walk under the arch. I mean, we can obviously see railings around it, but it was the tradition, of course, because of what it represented, that Jews would never walk underneath it. Except on the night of May the 14th, 1948. When Israel was declared a state, the Jews of Rome had a triumphant parade and marched under the arch. Their message: Rome is gone, we're still around, victory is ours. Hundreds of thousands of people died. Many more were enslaved. I'm going back now to 70 AD. There were so many Jews flooding the slave market after the Great Revolt that you could buy a Jewish slave for less than the price of a horse. Remember what I quoted you from Romans 8? Romans 8:36, as it is written, for your sake we are being put to death all day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter. There was such little value attached to the life of a Jewish slave. I've got pictured here, you may or may not be able to see, it's another Roman coin. So like we do in the UK and probably in other places, stamps are made, coins are minted to mark specific occasions, aren't they? And nothing has changed back in the Roman Empire as well. This one, the inscription is JUDEA Capita, or JUDEA Capta. And it's basically a marking of the victory of the Romans over Judea. JUDEA Capta means Judea is captured. And you've got a weeping woman and then a victorious half-naked Roman man standing over her. Sorry? There's no specific date to the coin, but it's going to have happened around the time 70-71 AD when the victory took place. So this holds significance on a number of levels for us, doesn't it? It marks, yes, the destruction of the temple. It marks the pillaging of the temple and all the holy artifacts that came out of it. It reminds us of what was stolen to build the Colosseum, which became a temple for torture and barbarism. But it also stands to mark the fulfillment of prophecy. And if we can prove one fulfillment of prophecy to be happening, we can also reasonably look to the fulfillment of other prophecy, can't we? And this is really the significance, isn't it? It will be trampled until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And then we see the restoration of Israel, we see the return of Yeshua the Messiah, because ultimately all his plans and purposes are coming to fulfillment, so that he will be the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. It will be him that is glorified across the face of the earth, regardless of how people see it right now. So this is just one other piece of evidence, a physical piece of evidence to point us in that same direction.